Welcome to Wandering and Pondering.
The podcast of two overly opinionated teenage girls who wander through life, pondering the world around them.
I'm Ava.
And I'm Lola.
And today's episode is entitled, Ew, That's So Cringe. So I think, based on the title, most can assume that today we'll be talking about cringe culture.
Cringe culture.
Blech.
I think we should start with the very important distinction between cringing and cringe, the concept.
Yeah, so me and Lola have first-hand experience in the world of quote-unquote cringe.
Mm-hmm.
When I was around
The 2020 era.
2020 era, I
it.
partook in a certain costume activity known as cosplay. And I was an anime watcher. So I think those of you who will know and who were around in that era will probably guess what I was doing.
And no matter how incriminating this is, we must cite our sources. So when I was little, I really liked Harry Potter. So at that time, I got into the world of fan fiction. Not the weird stuff, I promise. So,
Which characters would you enlighten us?
Harry Potter's parents and his friends.
The Marauders.
The Marauders.
Now, we've grown out of that era. I've thrown away all of my supplies.
And I mean, my supplies was all online. But,
yeah. Lola just hasn't revisited those sites.
I haven't revisited those sites in a while.
Just recently, but we did that for the jokes. So, I'm a very large supporter of cringing at things. I'm not judgmental, but I have a really hard time controlling my facial expressions. It's all because of COVID. Because, if you guys went to school with masks locks, I know some schools really was online up until the brink of things. But with a mask on, you're able to make whatever faces you want, and nobody will know unless you conceal your eyes. And so I just started making faces all the time. And once masks came off, I just can't control my face. So people can, if I think something's a little, people can tell because my mouth turns a weird way, or my eyebrows wince a little. And I think a lot of people are overly judgy. And so this is kind of where it becomes, you gotta tiptoe around the subject a little bit. But cringing at people or at things is relatively normal.
Because we all have definitions of what's, funny and what's not funny.
Yeah.
And what behavior we consider acceptable and not acceptable.
And in the end, it is not our place to judge, but nobody should be expected to be like Mother Mary or anything.
And there's a difference between being a judgmental person and judging people for doing things. I would argue that if you don't judge, it means you don't have a definition of right or wrong.
Exactly.
Or, everyone judges. It's just important to not hate too much.
Yeah, for example, I'm a victim of secondhand embarrassment. There was this one time where somebody cried in front of the class during a presentation and ran out of the class. And sure, I was very empathetic. I was like, oh, I feel so bad because I have intense anxiety too. But it's just in that situation, I could never imagine breaking out into tears in front of a class. I just could not imagine allowing myself that to happen.
I feel like there's something to be said about having anxiety and actually feeling more secondhand embarrassment compared to certain situations because of this anxiety. Because that if it happened to you, you would you would feel so overly mortified. It's almost incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that you're judging that person at all. It's the opposite because you empathize with them. You understand what having anxiety like that is like. But it's just that feeling of this, or I'm sorry, I'm muttering a lot. I'm gonna cut this out, but the thought of that happening to you is just so terrifying, right?
The empathy you have for them is the emotions you would have in that moment, which would be oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. So when it's happening to them, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. Exactly. This makes me want to. And since we are high schoolers, and most people have been to high school, everybody knows of those people you see walking around the hallways. You're like, you don't look like something I've seen before. Mm-hmm. That sounds a little sus, if I'm being honest. But every era has their token animal kids, also known as furries. I have very strong opinions about furries.
Share.
I think people overhate on furries.
I agree.
Like, oh my god, just let them be. Like, holy shart. It's just... Sure, a lot of furries are really weird, but they should be judged because they're weird. Not because they're furries. Every single type of person has a weird genre. Anime, okay, and people judge anime people too, but furries get more hate. Anime people, there's like normal people who like anime, and then there's weirdos who sexualize kids. But not every anime, like, person who enjoys anime should be like ostracized, but every single person who's a furry is ostracized. Do I see a person wearing a tail? I saw someone with like a furry head backpack in the mall, and I looked at them, I was like, oh, that's a furry.
Oh yeah, I see people with like the fuzzy tails and like ears.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
Do I see them and like go, oh, that's a little strange? Yes. And do I text my friends, I just saw a furry, guys?
Oh, absolutely.
But the problem is I'm going, oh my god, that's a furry! Blech. No. I don't give a shart if you're a furry or something.
Because realistically, it's just self-expression. And if you're making really overly sexualized videos on the internet, then I will think you're bizarre, and I will hate internally.
But that's because you're making overly sexualized videos on the internet.
Yeah. That's weird for anyone.
Yeah.
No matter the interests.
Yeah. The way we would define cringing versus cringe, things that are considered to be quote-unquote cringe are just things that don't conform to the status quo.
Exactly.
So, for example, emo people have always been regarded as cringe. Like, I love black, and I kind of love being emo sometimes. I like dressing a little edgy, as one would say. But, and for a long time, I would get called emo by a lot of people, and it bothered me. I was like, I'm not emo! But nowadays, I call myself like, oh my god, I love being an emo. I love being emo.
Because there's something so freeing about being cringe and having cringe interests.
Yeah.
We'll kind of get into that in a bit.
And it's also depending on who's saying it. Like, if you, back in the 2020s, you know, back in the day, people, if you were all black, you were considered to be emo. But then you would see the, like, normal, popular, prettier kids wearing black sweatpants and a black hoodie, and they weren't called emo because they were cool and popular, and maybe didn't have brown hair to top it off.
They were conforming with their Aritzia black hoodie and their Lululemon black sweatpants, right? And that's all the difference, is that they're participating in these micro trends that render them
normal.
Yeah.
And then cringing is just when you see something you don't particularly like and just go, ugh. You know? Cringing is a very normal emotion.
It's natural. As long as you don't let that hate, like, affect someone else's well-being, there's not really much wrong with it.
Yeah, and there's no problem with thinking, oh, this person wants to dress up as an animal or wants to dress up as some random TV character. You can think that's bizarre, but you shouldn't let that, like Lola said, you shouldn't let that affect your view of the person or view someone like that as below you or unnatural. You can think it's not normal, but a lot of people treat this stuff like it's unnatural.
Which is not the case.
Exactly. So, yeah, that kind of ends our little definition. And, yeah, so the way this stuff comes about in schools and just in society, especially in social media, because social media is kind of a lot where the cringe culture originated. It's
where, like, cringe culture has always existed, and, you know, people have always cringed, and the concept of popularity has always existed, and belittling those that are other than us has always existed. But social media has mainstreamed that and made it so that what is considered cringe encompasses a much larger group of people.
Exactly. And once I'm gonna like expand on the social media thing. It's since people like to say social media isn't real. But the problem is social media is not real. That is the problem. But so many people are on social media, so what they see becomes their perception of the people. So this whole idea that people who cosplay, read fan fiction, are furries or emos or indie people, not Indian people, indies, they're guys, I'm gonna get told that they're weird sure, you can categorize yourself as that, and you are going to see people online who identify as cosplay, people who cosplay furries, this or that are weird. And the people who don't understand these subcultures or are a little bit more on the judgmental side, they'll see this and think, okay, so this is what the community is. And then to a degree, you can't blame them for thinking that's what it's like, because that's all they're seeing. But the problem is that they take this social media as reality, or what people are saying about these people as reality, instead of thinking for themselves. And maybe even thinking, okay, maybe I think this is a little bizarre, but is this really everybody that does this? It can seem like it, but it's just social media curates itself to what you're watching. So if you keep watching weird videos of a certain type of people, you're going to keep getting weird videos of those people.
You know, it's important to remember media literacy, especially in the time of algorithms, like you say, that do curate themselves to what you watch, where that's how you get into internet rabbit holes. And how you learn to develop, like, just plain untrue thoughts. You know, that same concept could be applied to anything political. You know, I'm sure we all have aunts and uncles that have their Facebook rabbit holes of untrue propaganda and stuff. Like, is the stuff you're seeing actually real? Or, you know, is that just what the algorithm keeps showing you? And I guess the whole social media also I would say it makes it so that the concept of cringe has extended past these typically weird or like niche interests. And I've seen people cringe at like still wearing shoes that were popular a year ago. And that whole idea of micro trends and fast fashion, how these things recycle. And it's not just cringing at kids who do cosplay, it's cringing at people who have the same wardrobe that they did 3 years ago. You know,
sorry for interrupting you, but there's this one gray sweater that I thrifted, and I've been wearing it for 3 years, and I wear the exact same outfits. Sure, my pants shift because I changed, like, the one thing my style changes out of is kind of what pants I wear. And I wear the exact same outfits with it. I'm just wearing different pants. But I've been wearing that exact same look for 3 years, and I love it.
It's a slay.
Exactly.
But I guess this is kind of segues into our next point, which is that cringe culture is developed and nurtured by capitalism.
Yes.
And that, you know, these concepts that you think exist naturally in you, it's like, okay, yes, it's normal to cringe at people, but the idea of like hating on a group of people for doing this thing or for appearing a certain way is actually just capitalist conditioning.
Yeah,
right?
Because capitalism works to limit self-expression, because you have to work a certain way to succeed. And sure, that's the work mindset or education mindset, where if you don't do well in school or if you don't work hard enough, you're not going to succeed. But it's kind of, if you don't conform to what the capitalists and what people think is correct, then that means you didn't do enough. And yeah,
and if you're still wearing the same clothes you were 3 years ago, it means you weren't buying as many clothes as everyone else.
Exactly.
So
you're poor.
Capitalism
Being poor isn't cool, apparently.
Exactly. You know, capitalism uses facets such as social media to condition you into thinking that you need to buy new clothes and you need to change the way you look every so often so that they can keep profiting off of you consuming to fit these standards. And cringe culture contributes to that.
Exactly. And like, it's how, sure, if we talk a lot about 2020 when it comes to cringe culture, but that's because the circumstances of 2020 for a lot of the world was such like a breeding ground for very niche, not niche because they became popular, but very specific circumstances.
Yeah, because everything was online, right? Because we couldn't see each other because we were all in lockdown. And so, you know, all these facets of self-expression started to develop because we couldn't express ourselves face to face. And then once we started being able to see each other again, those things started to become cringe because we cycled out of them.
Exactly. Like the Indian e-girl styles. Though if you had like a solid bucket hat bracelets going up your arm, or if you had chains on your pleated skirt with a belt and a black shirt and some fishnets or fishnet gloves or whatever, you were considered to be super cool.
Oh yeah.
But if you
did
even
that
see
now.
someone like that now, everybody's like, whoa, what are you doing?
Mhm.
Because part of it is the association of nobody wants to think about what people, like what we were going through back in 2020.
Mhm.
But it's also that those things cycled out so fast and they were considered to be so cool, but now if you do them, people are like, oh my god, that's so cringe, that was so 2020.
Because everything that's considered cringe now, I would say for the most part, was considered cool at some point, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the argument that capitalism just wants to cycle things out quickly so they can keep profiting off of it. Like, they make things cool and then they immediately make things uncool so that you have to change yourself and consume in order to change yourself.
Yeah.
And another point is that harmful concepts such as homophobia and transphobia and racism are also spread through cringe culture. That lots of what we consider cringe is just different, like what we said, and people who, I guess, correspond with identities like that are often considered different.
Yeah. Because the whole part of like we said earlier, the whole part of cringe culture is to hate on people who are different. And the biggest, like the first thing when people think about people that were thought to be different is racism.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we go further a little bit, people of different sexual identifications or gender decisions. No, it's not the right word, but gender identities. That's
There
what it
you
is.
go.
And it's just people, if you're not, it's just another form of repression because people just want to repress what's not normal. And maybe
Exactly.
it might not come out as intentional racism or intentional homophobia or intentional transphobia, but we always end up back in these places. It's like, I'm a victim of watching too much Drag Race when I was a child. And
It shows.
yeah, in the end, I end up speaking with kind of like gay slang or LGBTQ slang. I say slay. It's like, yes, work, or like,
And you did it before that became like quote unquote TikTok language. I don't like calling it that because that's not what it was. But before words like that got mainstreamed through social media, you used them.
Yeah, like we made a short film in 6th grade.
5th grade.
5th grade? Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. 5th grade. And you can tell that I was watching Drag Race at the time.
Yes.
Drag Race at the time, because there's this part that I'm like, oh my god, what was it? You
beat that girl
to the ground. I had too much sass. Too much drag queen sass for a 5th grader. But, and even though I don't talk as drag queenie now, sometimes my language can also come out as the quote-unquote Valley Girl accent. Mm-hmm. But in the end, if I were to post myself on social media speaking the way I speak, some people would love it because they like the way that I talk because they think it's slay. Mm-hmm. But other people are like, oh my god, why is she saying slay? Like, that's such an annoying way to speak. And I'm insecure about it. Sometimes I think about, oh, do people think the way I'm talking, the way I'm speaking is annoying? Because there's a friend of ours who doesn't actually like the way I talk, and every time I say like, oh, I understand that this is bright when I say it kind of jokingly, but it's become a habit, so it's jokingly, but I can't stop. I say stuff like RN, but I say like RN to make it sound like a joke, but it's just kind of become a part of my vocabulary. Or like when I say FR for real, it really is a joke because that one just doesn't roll off right. Just doesn't ring right as RN. But whenever I say FR jokingly, he's like, did you seriously just say that? Like, oh my god. Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. But some people are haters and he thinks that cringe. And speaking, like, people's way of speaking has always been the biggest form of self-expression.
Exactly.
Because it, like we keep stating, it just all comes down to people wanting to shut down people's self-expression. Like, when I did my dress up, it was almost, it's literally an escape from all of your worries because you quote unquote become another person. Mm-hmm. And it's fun to just play pretend and stuff.
It's why people like do makeup.
Exactly.
And dress up and put on fun outfits. It's the same thing. But what you do is considered cringe.
Exactly. And then when you read certain fan-made literary things, then you're once again it's reading. You're escaping from reality, and
I
you're
love reading.
yeah. And but then when you read fan fiction, you decide to pick exactly which reality, and so you're in complete control because you sure it's a story you won't know what's going to happen, but you can kind of guess the end,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to pick which reality you're in, and it makes you happy. But then other people are just miserable in their sad realities, and so they're not happy when other people are happy.
Like you say, language is the biggest form of self-expression, and it actually is quite problematic to categorize certain ways of self-expression as cringe when they originate from certain groups. The
Oh yeah.
drag or like gay slang has become cringe now because it's been mainstreamed through social media and then became really cool and then became cringe. Or this was a popular conversation with the AVE, right? African American Vernacular English, where, I mean, lots of the debates on this are kind of challenged, but you have African American slang that's now become cringe, where you'll say a word and people are like, ew, you still say that? And it's like, because they think of it as TikTok slang. I'm like, this is actually quite problematic because now you're categorizing the way a group of people speak as cringe, right?
Exactly.
And you're shaming them for that and saying that they should change when it's not just like an interest of theirs, it's actually a culture.
Exactly, and that leads to the racism or different phobias. It's like how some men like to say more expressive words, and I'm going to say expressive just to like generalize the LGBTQ lingo. They like to use those types of words, or they just speak in a more expressive kind of way, and that leads to guys saying, "Whoa, bro, you're being gay," or like, "Oh my god, that's so gay," or like, "He's zesty." And sure, they mean it as a quote unquote joke, but making a joke like that hates on a certain group is homophobia.
Oh, absolutely. Or like fruity was a thing a few years back.
We
Now
were
it's like,
victims of saying it though.
oh yeah, I mean, we're not above this, right? We're all still victims of that culture, but it's just important to acknowledge that when you say like, oh, he's zesty looking, or he's
That's
gay,
literally homophobic.
and it doesn't always appear that way, right? But you're saying he looks gay in a negative connotation. But the word zesty, because it's like a TikTok word,
Or because it has some like, it doesn't sound very
ambiguity
serious
about it.
Yes.
It becomes okay to say unless you really think about what it actually means, right?
Yeah, and it goes in the same with transphobia, except transphobia, right? Especially in recent times, a lot of the transphobic content, you don't need to consider it to be cringe to be transgender. You just need to be transgender, and that's bad.
Exactly, because that's especially with people who transition. They break the beauty standard.
Oh yeah.
To the most extreme way that you can, right? Because, I don't know, what's considered feminine, if you're like a female to male, you're literally, what's considered ugly for a woman is what looks masculine, right? So when you're transitioning, you're going to the polar opposite of your beauty standard. That's so cringeworthy because you don't look the way that you're supposed to look for the gender that you were assigned.
Yeah. Even when you do decide to make the decision to transition, you have to be that right type of trans. If anybody listening follows along with online LGBTQ commentary, I understand people that don't, because it is very much of a brain rot and toxic place to be. But I also think it's very important because especially now a lot of activism is done online. So I think the people who hate on online activism are just a little elitist. I'm like, if you're going to hate, why don't you go out into the street and get punched in the face?
It's the easiest way to mainstream a movement, which leads to some problematic things.
Yeah, because everybody gets a platform. And so recently there was a lot of two very popular figures in the transgender online community was a trans man named Calvin Guerra and a trans woman named Blair White. And most people probably heard of Blair White because she's been in media a lot more than Calvin Guerra has. Calvin Guerra's kind of died off a little bit, but they were super popular because they were two very passing trans people, and they were the right kind of trans because they
conventionally attractive.
They were conventionally attractive, and they ended up not looking like they were trans. Blair White just looked like she got a lot of plastic surgery done, and Calvin Guerra just looked like a short man. And so they passed well, and they became incredibly judgmental of other trans people. If you were anything else but a strict trans man or woman, you were cringe, and they would make fun of them because they had pink hair but they wanted to be a man. because that was cringe, because you still weren't the right kind of trans. You didn't conform to what you should be.
Which is interesting because these are people who actually benefit from the idea of freeing themselves from these beauty standards or ideas of masculinity and femininity, and yet they're pushing it so intensely onto others. Right? The idea that pink is feminine is such a ridiculous statement. It's toxic masculinity, essentially. You can't wear pink if you're a man because that's feminine. Yeah, and yet you're pushing that idea onto others.
Exactly. And when we probably could have renamed this episode something else, because cringe or cringe culture is just a new word for judgment and discrimination.
Exactly.
Because I've been kind of analyzing what we've been saying. Our conversations often just kind of trail off into when we discuss about people being judged or discriminated. Because people think of cringe culture as just a goofy little thing between teenagers or people online. But it's actually such a big issue because it just feeds a new type of disguised discrimination.
Because, exactly what you said, cringe culture is just judging those who don't conform. And those who don't conform are either oppressed groups, I guess, or, which you can't call that discrimination, but it is hate, anime enjoyers, right? Sometimes you'll see comments or just content on social media towards people who enjoy these relatively innocent things, and they're actually quite hateful, and there's a way to find them funny because we've been conditioned into thinking that hate like that is humor. I like to think about whether I received hate like that, and that would make me feel quite terrible, actually.
Yeah, well, because unfortunately I was naive in thinking that I've always had a private account on social media, and when I would post things, I would post in my cosplay and whatever. And it's sad because I left those videos up because I didn't really see a problem with them. Did I stop cosplaying and think back? When I thought back to it, I was like, oh, don't love that. I was just cringing at myself because I was a young version of me that was doing silly things. In the end, if I would go back to it, I would not change if I did cosplay or not.
Of course
because
not.
It made me happy. And the problem is people keep holding that against me. And in our 6th grade yearbook, there's an image of me on Halloween. I was dressed up as an anime character, and our friend group keeps making fun of me for that one goddamn image.
And they're making fun of you for something that made you happy. People's happiness should make you happy. And so if you're making someone feel bad about their happiness, then that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and what I've kind of done now is decide not to go, oh my god, why are you even talking about that? Oh my god, don't bring that up. I just say, and so what? I was having fun. You have a problem with me having fun as a kid? And people just kind of stop talking because when I tell them that, they can't hate on me because I'm not affected by the hate. Are you gonna hate on a kid for playing with dolls? Would you play it with dolls as an adult now? I mean, I would. Anybody has good condition, Monster High or Ever After High dolls, contact us at the Wandering and Pondering email. But, most adults aren't playing with dolls now. They're gonna be playing Brawl Stars.
No, exactly. And you realize you're hating something just because it doesn't fit the status quo, which doesn't make any sense, because you're letting other people define what's okay and not okay with no actual grounds for that definition.
And you can think of what's not okay for you personally, but it's a problem when you define for other people what's not okay.
Mm-hmm. And there's nothing not okay about dressing up as characters. If you have no problem with Halloween, but you have a problem with people doing cosplay and being normal about it, let's say, then you need to, you need
to reality check. Because personally, this is kind of backwards. I dislike Halloween. I don't care for dressing up for Halloween. Even when I did cosplay, I didn't really care that much about dressing up for Halloween. I don't love Halloween as a holiday. Mm-hmm. I'm allergic to peanuts and most nuts, so when I go... I'm at risk. And also when I go trick-or-treating, I have to give away half of my candy because I can't eat it. So I've just never understood the appeal of Halloween. But people like Halloween just to dress up, especially when you get older, because you can't really go trick-or-treating. But people still love to dress up, and they dress up as ridiculous things, or even freaky things that are silly. People dress up as plugs and chargers.
Yeah.
Or we'll talk about this in a later episode. People are dressing up as sexy Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
That's for a later episode.
Yeah. But people love to dress up as different things because it makes them happy. They get to be something else for a night. But as soon as someone else wants to have that same thrill whenever they want, that's wrong. How can you hate on something you enjoy because someone else gets to have that joy more often than you do. You should be jealous you're not doing that.
Which is why having cringe interests is actually kind of freeing. Because for one, you find something that makes you happy. But I found personally that embracing the fact that I or maybe didn't fit the status quo, or I wasn't conforming to what's good and not good and what makes me pretty and not pretty, or socially acceptable or popular, is kind of nice. Because then I just kind of get to accept that I will be viewed as cringe, and then I get to conform to that lifestyle, where I stop caring about fitting a certain image, and I'm actually a lot happier for it. You know, and I've had popular friends, and I realize I'm not saying they're unhappy people, but the fact that I just let myself be who I am, to a certain extent, you know, every teenage girl is taught to dislike themselves, but more so than lots of people I know, it's made me a lot better of a person, I think.
Yeah. I'm the one who is, like, sure, Lola has her fan fiction stuff, and people joke about it, but then most people who don't know, the only people who can really hate on people who have read fan fiction are other people who have read fan fiction.
Because there's a lot of weird stuff out there.
You have to know, you have to know one to know one, you know? But everybody can kind of understand what cosplay, so I've just been enduring, I've just consistently been enduring all this hate, but like I said, I just don't care anymore because it made me happy. And it makes me happy now to think back on maybe when I was during COVID era. I was sad. Actually, this was actually before COVID, now that I think about it. I went to a convention. It was about a year or two before COVID started, so I don't really know how old I was. I was pretty young when I started doing it. But I was a young kid who would be sad on occasion, you know, stressed out about school, even though it was elementary school. I was just a very anxious child, and being able to be someone else made me so happy. And I've always thought that the world is really drab, especially since, like, you know, we get into our philosophical and political debates, and not debates because we agree on those things, actually.
It's true.
We have our conversations. We discuss everything that sucks. So things tend to get a little dark, and being able to, even for a second, make my world into a world that has magic, or I have a magical power, or maybe I save the world in one way or another. How can people find that not amazing? It's the same feeling you get of when you're watching, like, you're invested in a really good TV show. Or for those of you who read, you're reading a really nice fantasy, mystery, adventure, or whatever book, and you're like, oh my god, I'm immersed. Being able to dress up or read whatever fan fiction or think or enjoy any single reality you'd like is so freeing, and it's the best way to do things. And if that's not your reality, if you don't find pleasure in any of those things, that's fine.
But most people do find pleasure in escapism in some way, right? We escape through watching TV shows, through reading books, like you say. This is just a little bit more intense of an interest. And yet, when it crosses that line, it becomes unacceptable in normal society, which is just ridiculous. If you're hating on someone else's happiness, then you need
to reevaluate your happiness, because you're clearly not that happy.
And there's something like, I stand by the fact that things are only embarrassing or awkward if you make them embarrassing or awkward, and learning to just accept the fact that we had quote-unquote embarrassing pasts, and just embracing that makes life so much easier.
Yeah, it makes us kinder and more empathetic.
Exactly. That's what I will say, is that people who have been judged for things that they shouldn't have been judged with often are those who are more accepting.
Yeah, because they know what it's like to be quote-unquote different, or have people dislike what makes them happy. Because you don't have to find joy in reading fan fiction or dressing up.
Yeah.
Like, at some point I stopped finding joy in that.
Me too.
Yeah. But to hate, just because it doesn't fit your fancy doesn't mean you should hate on it for being someone else's fancy.
Exactly.
Okay. And you're allowed to cringe at things when things are toxic. Like, for example, when you see a couple in the hallway being all gross and kissy and lovey and stuff. Yeah. You're allowed to cringe at those couples, but you're also more likely to cringe at a couple who is acting all gross if they look emo, like a furry, are overweight. That's one thing I
Exactly.
see a lot
Oh
online.
yeah.
People just hating on a couple because they're overweight.
Or I saw with the release of the movie Challengers, where polyamory has always been a controversial topic, I guess. It's very new, so people find it weird. I don't know my personal thoughts on the matter.
I just can't stop thinking of that one Webtoons comics.
Oh yeah,
Boyfriends.
boyfriends.
Whenever I
That
need to
was such-
whenever I need to torture someone, I make them watch them. I think have I forced you to watch the episodes with me recently?
I don't think so. We
Okay,
should
well,
do
I'm
that.
going to. We're going to do that right after this podcast. But when I first got comfortable with my boyfriend, I actually forced him to watch them, watch the boyfriends things. So guys, we really like you, and I think we should all date.
But that was
That's
weird
what we
because-
were thinking.
But I've seen people say, like fully serious, that they realize that they only hate polyamory when it's ugly people participating in it. Where they'll see like an actual polyamorous couple and they'll be like, ew, this is gross. And then challengers come out, and I haven't actually seen it. I don't know if it's actual polyamory. I don't really know. But, you know, and people, I've seen multiple people say that. And yes, it is just challenged online discourse. But that's just a crazy statement, right? Oh, wait, I only like polyamory when it's hot people.
I can guarantee, even for me, I would pay more attention to a couple who looked a little more unhot if they were being all gross and if they were hotter. And I was like, just because we talk about these things and we critique them doesn't mean we're holier than thou. We also do these things sometimes.
Because we've been conditioned into it. No one's
perfect.
This is like flashbacks to our first episode. We're not saying that any of these thoughts are your fault because you've been conditioned into thinking them, but you just have to analyze them
and be aware that you
dissect
may
them.
do this.
Yes, and in an attempt to be better.
Yeah. So, once again, just to finalize this episode, cringe culture is just disguised young person discrimination. You can do whatever you want as long as you're attractive.
Yeah.
Or you look quote unquote normal. And conforming always leads back to being pretty and rich. Money, money, money must be funny in a rich man's world.
Anyway,
Yes.
I think that sums up our episode.
And just a bit of a teaser, we hope to soon be having some guests on the podcast.
I'm excited for that.
Me too. And the guests will range from our friends
To our teachers.
to our teachers. We have some teachers that we really like and that are very willing to be on the podcast. Anyways, thank you for listening. This has been Wandering and Pondering, episode 2. Ew, that's so cringe.